Father God, this morning we have sung about and heard about your incredible love, which is pouring down on us all the time. This morning I pray that you will open our eyes to see your love, our hearts to experience your love, our ears to hear your love, that we will know that you are always with us and you will never leave us nor forsake us. Through Jesus' name, amen. There, my baby Obed, my brand new grandson, is asleep at last. You know, there were so many times when I never thought I'd see this moment, never hold this child in my arms. But here we are, and God is mending my fractured fairy tale with this baby grandson. And you know, he's not even my own flesh and blood. How amazing is that? How amazing it is how God works when we give our fractured fairy tales to him. He writes our stories in surprising ways, and he weaves them into his bigger story. You know, when I was a little girl, my hopes and dreams were quite simple. All I wanted to do was to grow up and marry a kind man and have at least one son. He would have at least one son, and then our family line would be secure for the foreseeable future. Simple. It's not much of a fairy tale, really, but it was good enough for me, a young Israelite woman growing up in Bethlehem, not that long after we all arrived here in this land of promise. So I'd heard the stories of my ancestors wandering in the wilderness, living in tents, eating manna. So settling down in a proper house with fields and a well and a vineyard and a husband and sons seemed like paradise to me. You know, when I was born, my parents called me Naomi. Pleasant. It's quite a name to live up to, isn't it? Even when I felt like being grumpy or moody, or as soon as someone called my name, Pleasant, Naomi, it was a bit difficult to be unpleasant, wasn't it? So actually I learned to do kind things and say kind things and try to be cheerful and live up to my name and to keep going even though things were tough. And actually these were going to be really important lessons in a world where fairy tales fracture very easily. And where my only worth as a woman is in living long enough to produce at least one son. And if I survive that experience, maybe more. So when the time came, my parents chose Elimelech to be my husband. And his name means God, my God is kind. Interesting that. So my God is kind married Pleasant, Naomi. And it should have been the perfect formula for a perfect fairy tale. But life wasn't to be as kind and pleasant as we imagined. Eventually, we had two sons, well, two who survived childhood. At first, I was overjoyed to find myself with child, even happier when the midwife told me I had a son. But soon I realized something was not as it should be. He was not a strong baby. He did not flourish. He was sick. There were so many times I think he nearly died. I would stay up all night, holding him close, feeding him by drops, praying with all my heart and willing him to live. And every morning that I woke and found him still alive gave me hope that he might live long enough to father a son of his own, and my purpose would be complete. Caring for him took every ounce of my energy, my emotion, my spirit. It stretched my kindness, my pleasantness, my faith to their extremes, but I longed for him to live. And then another pregnancy. I prayed so hard this child would be healthy and well. And a son, another son. But soon I noticed the telltale signs of disease in his body too. Just like his brother. The same strange sickness, the weakness, the muscle wasting, more long nights nursing sick babies, facing my worst fears, and I raged and I ranted at God. All I asked for was one healthy son. How hard was that? Almost all the mothers I know had plenty of healthy children, hordes of them. And so my fairy tale dream of a family was fractured. But we managed to keep them alive, our two fragile sons. We call them Marlon and Chilion. Their names mean sickness and wasting. You probably think they're really strange names to call your children, but it was part of our protection for them. As soon as anyone called their names, people around would know our sons were vulnerable. They were fragile. Don't expect too much. And then the famine came, and it was hard enough to keep the two of them nourished in good times, and the famine was the final straw. We longed to stay in the safety of Bethlehem with our beloved family and friends. But once the crop fails and our supplies ran low, we had to find the nearest place that was still flourishing. And that, of all places, was Moab. But our fractured family was running low on hope and options, and this was a life and death choice. And so we took the risk of taking that long, painful journey down the dangerous road to Moab with 2 weak children and very little food. We were grasping at desperate straws. This was our only chance of survival. We made it to Moab. It was an uncomfortable and distressing place to live as refugees. Their laws and cultures totally different to ours. And child sacrifices, they sickened me to my heart. I would do anything to keep my 2 precious boys alive, weak and fragile as they were. And these people were destroying their beautiful, healthy children. Every day I saw things that troubled me, made me homesick for the safety and the community of Bethlehem, where we worshipped and we served a God of love who cares deeply about our children. Eventually we settled into life there, and the people pretty much accepted us and left us alone. Elimelech was able to work. We had some land and some sheep and chickens, enough to get by and feed our growing lads. You know, I always hoped that as they grew older, they would grow stronger. But that didn't happen. And over the years, we faced fresh new challenges as their illness developed. And even when the famine in Bethlehem had faded into memories, that journey back home was too strenuous for them. And my Elimelech was failing too. He wasn't strong enough to walk there and bring back a couple of nice Jewish girls. And anyway, who would let their daughters come all that way to live in Moab with an ailing husband? Not a great prospect. My fairy tale fractured again. There would be no lovely Jewish daughters-in-law, no lovely little Jewish grandchildren. We just had to get our sons married as soon as we possibly could, right there in Moab. So I looked out every day for the best Moabite girls I could find. I watched at the well and the town square for the kindest ones, the girls who cheerfully helped other people without ever being asked, the girls who hauled up the well bucket for the old lady with painful and twisted hands, the girls who'd help me carry my shopping home from the market, those who managed to stay sweet and cheerful, even though I knew their lives were so difficult. I looked for the girls who didn't flinch from hard work. But if there was one thing I had learned in my life over and over again, it was the biggest importance of choosing a kind spouse. So I found Ruth and Orpah. They're lovely young girls. They're gentle, kind, caring, perfect to care for our fragile and sickly sons. So our lives blended together warmly as we worked in the home and we took care of each other. In the evenings, we sat around the fire, and I would share the stories of my people, our people, the stories of our God. And as I did so, I realized that every single one of those great families had fractured fairy tales. Not the same fractures as ours, but things like deceit, bitter conflict, abuse, jealousy, sibling rivalry, favoritism, selling a brother into slavery, or even murdering him. But I really enjoyed our family life together. Ruth and Orpah shared my load. They helped me take care of their husbands, and it was a special time of closeness as we grew together as a family. We worked alongside each other in the everyday chores of life, cooking, shopping, growing things, taking care of the animals. We laughed and cried together, and Ruth and Orpah became the precious daughters I had never had. I longed to hear the news that one of them would be pregnant, that a baby was on its way at last, that one son would have one son. But that news never came. And then tragedy tripped over tragedy. First, my dearest husband died, Elimelech, who had been my strength, my love, my support, my protection. My fairy tale fractured again in a place I had not anticipated. In my story, we would live together to a ripe old age with grandchildren and great heart again, and my heart bled. And together with Ruth and Orpah, we mourned the loss of someone who could never be replaced. And just when I thought my fairy tale was as fractured as it could ever be, it shattered into a million pieces. Marlon and Chilean became weaker. We watched their lives disintegrate. We nursed them as best we could. But this time, their needs were beyond my understanding, beyond my care, beyond my skill. I was helpless. For Marlon and Chilean, it was the last straw, and we just held them close as they slipped out of life and into death. And now, I had no husband, no sons, no grandsons, no hope, no future. As a woman, I was nothing and I had nothing. I just wanted to curl up and die so we could all be buried in Moab, and that would be the end of everything. Our family line, our inheritance, our lives fractured into forgottenness and just obliterated forever. Ruth and Orpah were crushed too, and again we cried, we mourned together, we buried our loved ones and cried some more, but this time at a deeper level, a more frantic level. We had lost more than irreplaceable loved ones. We were now all alone, 3 vulnerable widows in a cruel world that was not kind to women without men, especially not in Moab. And my heart shuddered with the earth-shattering pain of loss and this strangling fear as how we might be exploited. This was no fairy tale ending. This was the stuff of nightmares. We cried, we mourned. I prayed, or I tried to pray, but my prayers had no words, just feelings and longings and pain and tears, just torn up in shreds and dumped in a basket at God's feet. I just asked for one thing in my life. My fairy tale dream wasn't some spectacular fantasy. I never wanted to be a princess in a palace. I just wanted to see one son, have one son. That was all the story I wanted. So I ranted and raged at God, the God who loves children and blesses families, but had taken them all from me. Or so I thought. Well, there was nothing left for me in Moab. Ruth and Orpah were still young. Their families were nearby. They had hope. But now it was time for me to pick up my few pieces, carry my tiny world back to Bethlehem. The day that I left, Ruth and Orpah clung to me. They walked along the road with me for a while. No one wanted to say goodbye. Our shared losses had somehow bound our aching hearts together. But I had no future to offer them. No husband, no sons, no money. Just a dangerous walk through the wilderness into poverty and the vulnerability of widowhood. So Orpah reluctantly let go, and she walked back to her family in Moab. But Ruth lingered. She clung to me. Don't force me to leave you, she said. Don't make me go home. Where you go, I go. Where you live, I'll live. Your people are my people, and your God is my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. So help me, God. Not even death itself is going to come between us. Such courageous love, such beautiful words. They brought tears to my eyes and healing to my heart. Even though I had blamed God for my suffering and ranted and raged, Ruth loved and trusted the God she had discovered through me. And maybe I could love and trust him again too. So we got back to Bethlehem, and my little home was still there, a bit dusty, in need of some repairs. But it was a safe and welcome place after that long, wild journey. But I wasn't the sweet and pleasant Naomi that had left 10 years earlier. I called myself Mara instead because I was bitter and I was hurting and grieving and raging. We'd gone to Moab to save our sons, and we might as well have stayed here in Bethlehem for all the good it did, because I never got to see have one son. My friends gathered around and we caught up with the news of the last 10 years, the births, the deaths, the marriages, the scandals, the joys, the disappointments. And slowly I realized that everyone's family fairy tales had been fractured in one way or another. And now some of them were slowly mending. New relationships, new babies, new hopes, new possibilities. Some of their stories were being retold in fresh ways with unexpected twists and turns in the narrative. As they looked back, they could see God's hand of loving kindness working his way through their pain. Maybe there could be an unexpected twist in my own story. I introduced them to Ruth. I was a bit hesitant. How would they respond to this young Moabite girl from a strange country with a strange religion? So I told them all about her sweetness and her generous kindness to me and our family, and her incredible courage to come with me on the long journey back home, her desire to be part of our community, our nation, her lifelong commitment to me. We had nothing when we arrived in Bethlehem, no money, no food, only what our kind and generous friends shared with us. So Ruth, bless her heart, decided to glean amongst the harvesters, gathering grain for us to grind and eat. It takes humility to glean. It's a job for the very poorest when you've got nowhere else to go. But she was more than willing to go so she could care for me. And God was with us both that day, caring for us and comforting us, because he guided Ruth to choose a field owned by Boaz. I'd always admired Boaz, one of my husband's relatives. He was a good man, known for his kindness, his generosity, his respect for everyone, no matter what their station in life. He had a special compassion for foreigners and vulnerable women, because his own mother was Rahab from Jericho, and she had welcomed the Israelite spies into her home and kept them safe, and her generous hospitality had saved her entire family. Even in the harvest field, Boaz was hospitable. As soon as he saw Ruth at work, he welcomed her, told her to stay in the fields so that he could protect her, told his men not to bother her, and told her to drink from the workers' water jars. Ruth was so surprised that a rich and noble man would treat her with such gentleness and respect. "Why are you being so kind to me," she said, "when I'm just a foreigner?" "Because I've heard how kind you are to your mother-in-law," he said. "You even left your own family to take care of her and come and live in this strange place amongst strange people. May God reward you for what you have done," he said, "and protect you and bless you." Ruth had never heard such words from a man she didn't know, and then he invited her to share lunch with his workers and gave her more than she needed so she could bring some home for me, along with a large basket full of grain. The pain of my deep losses was slowly beginning to heal. Of course, I would always be sad when I remembered my beloved husband and sons. Part of my heart will still be fractured, but something else was happening. My fractured fairy tale was being healed by the loving kindness of God, the warm generosity of my friends, the courageous commitment of Ruth, the incredible kindness of Boaz. I was glad I'd come back home to Bethlehem. My almost extinguished wick of hope flickered once again into flame. Began to notice the good things God was doing to show me his love, the blessings, the comforts, the joys that he was pouring into my life every single day. And Ruth. Ruth was my biggest blessing, a gift from God discovered in the unlikely place of a Moabite market square. Her love and laughter helped me through those hard times. I'd asked for one son. He would give me one son. But in his love, God had given me a daughter. She always had a smile. She worked cheerfully from morning to night, bringing home the gleaned grain and the leftovers from her lunch with the harvesters. She picked flowers to brighten our small home. The water jars were always full. She never complained about missing her family or wanting to go back to Moab. And I came to love her as if she were my very own. And I wondered how I could bless Ruth. She was young. She needed someone to love and protect her. She needed to produce an heir for Mahlon. The greatest gift I could give to Ruth would be to find her a husband. And I looked around, as we do in our culture, for the closest family member to my husband. And of course, there was Boaz. And he'd already noticed Ruth. I mean, who wouldn't? She was pretty, young, strong, sparkling with life. And she had noticed him, even though he was much older, because he had treated her with such kindness and respect. So I came up with a plan, and we used a strange and ancient ritual where a woman can show her interest in a man, even in our culture. Well, Ruth was a bit bemused by the whole procedure, but she trusted me and went along with my suggestion. And even though there was a closer relative who could have married Ruth, Boaz worked everything out in their favor. So Ruth was married to Boaz at the end of the harvest. It was a wonderful celebration. And as my friend said at the wedding, Ruth was such a blessing that she was worth more than 7 sons. And that's the highest compliment anyone could ever pay to a young foreign widow who gave up everything in the world to follow and love her mourning mother-in-law. And so here I am today. I'm nursing newborn baby Obed, the son of Moabite Ruth, and Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. He's chubby, he's robust, he's feisty, he's got strong little legs and loud little lungs. And God is rewriting my fractured fairy tale into something more wonderful than I could ever imagine with this brand new grandchild. I have not seen one son have one son, but I have seen one unexpected daughter have one very special son. And that is enough for me. It wasn't the fairy tale I had in mind, but it is truly a more wonderful love story than I could ever have imagined or written. And maybe God is healing our family from the sickness of my sons and strengthening it through the lines of Ruth and Boaz to create something that will endure forever. And who knows what stories will be told by Obed and future generations as they live out their lives and dreams with God. Because I have started to notice the great things God is doing here and now, the everyday blessings in our little family, the things that help to mend the fractures. And he will do even greater things in the future. Maybe there'll even be kings and queens in our family, great men or women who will make a difference in the world. And maybe, who knows, one day, even the Messiah. And as I look back on my life now, I am older and wiser, and I can see more clearly the hand of God weaving his patterns, making everything beautiful in his time. And even through my deepest tragedies, he was there, always, working in wonderful ways that I didn't even notice or recognize, because they didn't fit in with my fairy tale. But God took all those broken pieces and rewrote them into his grand story for my family, for my life, for eternity. And I've learnt some important lessons through my life of fractured fairy tales. Be kind to others, because it always comes back to us in kindness, and usually in greater measure than we give it. It returns to us pressed down and overflowing. No kindness is ever wasted or unnoticed by God. It always brings a blessing to the world and joy to his heart when we are kind like him. Build a network of caring people. Even one caring person like Ruth or Boaz can make a huge difference when your world falls apart and your fairy tales fracture. Life is unpredictable. It's painful. Be there to comfort each other when those fairy tales fractured. Don't walk past those who are struggling. Reach out and care. Help their stories to find new meanings and new endings. And plan ahead for the life events you can expect, and develop patience and resilience for the catastrophes you can't predict. Every family I know is at least a little fractured from living in a fractured world. And the story of any fractured family doesn't end where we think it ends. It goes on beyond us to find meaning in the future, meaning in eternity. So look for where God is working to mend things. Join him there. And remember that some stories don't make sense until we can turn around and look back on them. And some of them won't make sense till the end of time, when all our brokenness will be mended by God's love and forgiveness, and all our hearts will be made whole by his kindness, and all our tears will be wiped away by his comforting hands, when all our fractured fairy tales will come together, ultimately mended and beautiful in his eternal love story. Amen.